use a summarized book or an abridged book that would contain many of the elements of the madhab of Imam Shafi. That which would be fi ghayat al-ikhtisar. It's something which we would reach the extremity of summarization, meaning you can't summarize it more than that. So making it very, very small as it could be. Very small, but very comprehensive at the same time. What does mukhtasar mean? ما قال لفظه وكثر معناه. That which the ibarat and the words are small, meaning in number, but the meaning is great. You will come to see, inshallah, bi'idhnillah, that sometimes one word or one sentence that he mentions, alayhi rahmatullah, you'll be able to extract many masail pertaining to Islamic jurisprudence. And another manner that we learn from this is he didn't write the book because he felt like it. That's another thing as well that we learn from this. Early scholars, the only reason why they write is because either they were requested by a teacher, their teacher would tell them write something, or a student would tell them, ask them to write something. Somebody in which they would never be able to say, I can't. They wouldn't be able to read. That's why in Yaqut al-Nafis, another book, in Abu Shuja, after Abu Shuja, usually they study it, or sometimes before, he says them in his muqaddimah, somebody who I couldn't say no to asked me to author this book. Meaning, had it not been for the fact that I was requested to, I don't believe that I'm the one who should be writing this book. Wallahi, extremely humble, very sincere. They wouldn't have written any of these unless they were requested to, by people whom they couldn't say no to. So they did it for what? For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake, first and foremost. And then he says, alayhi rahmatullah, they asked me to write a book, يَخِفُّ عَلَى الطَّالِبِ دَرْسُ. That which if a student of knowledge were to learn, it would be easy to comprehend. وَيَسْهُلُ عَلَى الْمُبْتَئِ حِفْظُهُ. And anybody who wants to memorize the text in Islamic jurisprudence would have the ability also to do so. وَأَنْ أُكْثِرَ فِيهِ مِنَ التَّقْسِيمَاتِ. And that I would increase, and he says, I will also ask, and I will increase in this book the different what? Chapters. So there's going to be many different chapters. Okay, fusul, there will be abwab, kutub. He has literally, alayhi rahmatullah, segregated the book into many different chapters. وَحَصْرِ الْخِصَالِ. And he will mention also some of the rulings as well. Mandub, sunnah, wajib, XYZ. So many of the masail that he comes across, he will give you also a general ruling. فَأَجَبْتُهُ. So he mentioned all of that is what he was requested to do. What we mentioned now, that was what he was requested to do. So they told him, we need you to write a book. This book has to be in the madhab of Imam Shafi. It has to be something which a beginner student of knowledge could comprehend. It has to be something which a beginner student of knowledge could also memorize if they wanted to memorize it. It should be something which is easy to teach, and it should be a book which is easy to memorize. And he said, فَأَجَبْتُهُ إِلَى ذَلِكَ. I responded to the request. فَأَجَبْتُهُ إِلَى ذَلِكَ. I responded to the request that they made from me. طَالِبًا لِلثَّوَابِ. I don't want any reward, and I don't request anything except the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. رَاغِبًا إِلَى اللَّهِ فِي التَّوْفِيقِ لِلصَّوَابِ. Asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give me the tawfiq and the guidance to write that which is correct. How many of us today, when we have an examination, for example, any type of examination, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easy for us? How many of us leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How many of us put all of our trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even for your dunya matters? For example, a person who wants to get his driver's license, for example, or somebody who's got an exam in university or college. When was the last time you asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, enable me to pass this exam, give me tawfiq? You want to write something, a letter to somebody, oh Allah, give me tawfiq, let me write it in a way in which it would have full of barakah, in which my intention would be met with this letter, for example. This is something we can learn from these people, is that we should put all of our trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that we should request Allah's guidance in whatever it is that you do, in dunya and for akhirah. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً. Oh Allah, give us good in dunya and give us good in akhirah. إِنَّهُ. And then he praises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything, the praise of Allah comes in the beginning, and the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes in the end. وآخر دعوانا عن الحمد لله رب العالمين. He says that إنه على ما يشاء قدير. Indeed, Allah is ever powerful to fulfill that which He wants to do. وَبِعِبَادِهِ خَبِيرٌ. And His slaves, He is ever observant over the actions of His slaves, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Kitab al-Tahara. So he begins, alayhi rahmatullah, in the book of al-Tahara, or purification. Now the word al-Tahara, linguistically, it means an-nadafa. So an-nadafa, it means when you khulus min ad-danas. A person cleanses himself or herself from any impurity. That's the linguistical meaning when we say tahara or purification. You should be purified in your essence. This is the meaning that we can understand. The technical meaning. There's a technical meaning and there's a symbolic meaning. The symbolic meaning is that you should also be purified on the inside. There is no good for a person to only think of themselves or work on their purity on the outside when the inside is corrupt, or when they abandon that which is on the inside. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَاهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, indeed successful is the one who purifies it, and corrupt is the one who debases it or corrupts it, meaning the soul. So this is something which is very important for us to take into consideration. The symbolic understanding is something which is also extremely important, that most of us, unfortunately, we don't pay much attention to. How many of us work hard in order to clean all that which is on the inside? How many of us ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us a clean heart, and a heart which is pure? The Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, what did he say? He said, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. The day in which there no money, no wealth, no children will avail anybody except the one who comes to Allah with a sound heart. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be looking at on Yawm al-Qiyamah. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he also mentioned in another hadith, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَنْظُرُ إِلَىٰ أَجْسَامِكُمْ وَصُوَرِكُمْ وَلَكِنْ يَنْظُرُ إِلَىٰ قُلُوبِكُمْ وَأَعْمَالِكُمْ. He said sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, indeed Allah, He doesn't look at your forms and your shapes, but what He looks at is your actions and your heart. That's what Allah takes into consideration on Yawm al-Qiyamah. He will be looking at hearts and actions. It doesn't matter how you look like in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah will be looking at the heart. If the heart is corrupt, then Allah musta'an. If the heart is good, then bushra, good news for that person. The author, the technical or shari'i meaning that we are discussing in this book is ibara. This is an ibara, or when we say the word tahara, it means raf'u hadathin. When a person engages in removing from themselves that state of impurity. What kind of impurity is that? A type of impurity which allows a person to pray, or doesn't allow a person to pray. How to remove, or removing that. وَإِزَالَةِ النَّجَسِ, removing an impurity that's on you, or on your body, or on your clothes, or in the place in which you want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا فِي مَعْنَاهُمَا, and that which comes in accordance to the meaning. Can that meaning, is there only subject to that meaning, or is there another way to also understand the consequences? This is all going to be explained بإذن ta'ala, inshallah. The author, he starts and he begins with, and he says, الْمِيَاهُ الَّتِي يَجُوزُ بِهَا التَّطْهِيرُ سَبْعَةُ مِيَاهٍ. He says the water in which somebody is allowed for a person to purify themselves with are 7 types of water. Now the author, he starts with water in the beginning is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to pray your salawat. Sah? How will you be able to pray without purification? So because the purification, or because the salah has a condition within it, like purification, Allah talks about purification, and the ulama, they also talk about the importance of purification. So what is the element that purification can be gained for? What can be utilized in order to gain purification? Water. And others as well. So it's water. The earth, when somebody wants to make a tayammum. Also, it can also be done by using dry material, if somebody's using the toilet, for example. And other things, inshallah, that we will mention. The author, he says, الْمِيَاهُ الَّتِي يَجُوزُ التَّطْهِيرُ بِهَا سَبْعَةُ مِيَاهٍ. The water in which a person is allowed to utilize in order to gain purification are 7 types of water. Meaning these types of water, you can make wudu with it, you can also make ghusl with it. Meaning you can do ablution, you can make ablution, and you can take a bath in it. مَاءُ السَّمَاء. Number 1, he mentions مَاءُ السَّمَاء, rainwater. Water literally from the sky. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions in the Quran, وَيُنَزِّلُ عَلَيْكُم مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً لِيُطَهِّرَكُم بِهِ. And indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he causes to descend upon you from the heavens water that you may utilize for purification. Allah mentions it specifically. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it straight to the point, that which you can utilize for purification purposes. Also the author then he says, وَمَاءُ الْبِحَارِ or وَمَاءُ الْبَحْرِ, sea water. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned when some of the Sahaba, they came to him asking him, are we allowed to use أَنَتَوَضَّأُ مِنْ مَاءِ الْبَحْرِ? Can we utilize the water of the oceans and the seas? Because what they used to do is when they used to go on a ship, they were not rich people, okay? They never had that much water. They say if إِذَا تَوَضَّأْنَا بِهَا, if we use this type of water that we're drinking as wudu, then we're going to become thirsty. We won't have anything else. But is there a way in which we can keep the water and use the sea water to make wudu? Simple, sir. The Prophet ﷺ, he said to them, yes, absolutely you can. He said, هُوَ الطَّهُورُ مَاءُ الْحِلُّ مَيْتَةُ. He said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, indeed it is pure, its water is pure, meaning the sea. الْحِلُّ مَيْتَةُ. And the dead that you find in the sea, you can eat it. It's halal for somebody to eat. Usually what's the original ruling? حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَيْتَةُ. That anything that's dead is not permissible for somebody to eat. However, that which is in the sea is different. So the ruling is that anything that dies in the sea, you find it dead, or it comes, a big whale, for example, comes on the shore. It was mentioned that the Sahaba, radwanullahi alayhim, one day they saw a huge whale on the shore when the Prophet ﷺ sent some of them as an expedition, and then subhanAllah, they said for such a long period of time they were eating it, until they said we became fat. Until we became a bit fat, they said. Radwanullahi ta'ala alayhim. So it's something that is allowed and permissible. So the sea water, if a person has the opportunity to make wudu in the sea water, a person is allowed to do so, and it's absolutely permissible. The ulama, they take from this understanding salt water. So water which is salty. That is something that can be utilized. So will the impact of salt have any effect on the water? No, it won't. Because the sea is very salty, and the Prophet ﷺ allowed for purification to be done through the sea water. The author, he says, وَمَاءُ النَّهْرِ, and water which is river, so the river water. What about water which is river? Also known as sweet water. So anything which is sweet water, like the river for example, is allowed to also be used. So any type of salty water, any type of sweet water is also allowed to be used for purification purposes. The ulama, they say bil ijma', meaning the ulama, there is no difference of opinion in regard to the fact that a person could make wudu utilizing the water that comes from a river. There is no difference of opinion among any of the scholars. Fasara ijma'an, so it became a consensus of all of the scholars. وَمَاءُ الْعَيْنِ, the author then he says وَمَاءُ الْعَيْنِ, and water which is a spring water, that which comes from the earth, which is spring water. وَمَاءُ الثَّلْجِ وَمَاءُ الْبَرَدِ, مَاءُ الثَّلْجِ وَمَاءُ الْبَرَدِ. So snow and hailstones, they come from the same origin, sah? The origin is from the sky, and in its origin it was rainwater that became frozen, sah? So because of that, you go back to the asr, so the ulama, they say it's permissible for somebody to utilize for purification purposes. Also because the Prophet ﷺ mentioned it symbolically in a hadith, which is in Al-Bukhari and Muslim. The Prophet, he said, Or rather, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, once he said, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا كبر في الصلاة. When the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم used to make takbir for the salah, سكت هنيئة. He was quiet for a little while. قبل أن يقرأ, before he would recite. So he would make takbir and there was a period of silence before he would start the qira'ah عليه الصلاة والسلام. فقلت, once I asked him and I said, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, ما تقول, what were you saying in that period of silence between the takbir and the qira'ah of Surah Al-Fatiha? What did you say in between? He said, أقول, I said, اللهم باعد بيني وبين خطايا كما باعدت بين المشرق والمغرب. Oh my Lord, oh Allah, make me far away from my sins and my mistakes, the way you've made the east and the west far from each other. And he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, I said, Allahumma naqqini min khataya kama yunaqqa thawb al-abyad min ad-danas. Oh Allah, blot away my sins and my mistakes, just like you blot away a thawb which is white from any dirt, the way you blot it out completely. Allahumma ghsilni, oh Allah, bathe me, min khataya, from my sins, bima'i thalji wal barad, with snow and hail. He said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So the ulama, they say, if the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam specifically mentioned snow and hail in a hadith, in a narration, symbolizing cleaning something, then why is it not possible that we can utilize it in real life? If we ever had the opportunity to have snow, can we not use it as water? Inshallah, you melt it and you use it as wudu, no problem. There's something which is permissible. The ulama, they have a principle and a qa'idah that combines all of the 7 that he mentions into one principle. That's why it's important to understand qawa'id or principles. They say, كُلَّ مَا نَزَلَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ وَنَبَعَ مِنَ الْأَرْضِ. Anything that descends from the sky and that springs from the earth, you can use as what? As for purification. That is literally bringing all of the 7 that we mentioned into one small sentence. Anything that descends from the sky, كُلَّ مَا نَزَلَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ وَكُلَّ مَا نَبَعَ مِنَ الْأَرْضِ. Anything that comes from the sky and anything that descends from the sky, and anything that springs from the earth, a person is allowed to utilize for purification purposes. ثُمَّ الْمِيَاهُ عَلَى أَرْبَعَةِ أَقْسَامٍ. And I think maybe inshallah we should finish it there inshallah for this first session inshallah today, because I only have about 3 minutes left, or 15 minutes for question and answers bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We will start next week from ثُمَّ الْمِيَاهُ عَلَى أَرْبَعَةِ أَقْسَامٍ, the different aqsam and the different categories of water bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.